L'ultimo intervento di oggi è di Toby Baker della Fondazione Nesta. La Fondazione Nesta è una fondazione che si occupa di innovazione, in particolare di innovazione sociale. Grazie ragazzi, siete stati bravissimi, spero che non andiate via, non so se dovete scappare, no, vi state risedendo. Bene. Toby ci parlerà innanzitutto di quelle che sono le sfide che oggi la scuola deve affrontare, non soltanto in Italia ma nel mondo, ed è un momento di respiro internazionale. Noi ragioneremo con lui delle grandi sfide e anche di grandi esempi che vanno dal Brasile alla Nuova Zelanda al Galles di scuole innovative. Per cui lascerò la parola a Toby. L'intervento sarà in inglese, semplice, spero che sia comprensibile leggendo anche le slide. Per cui welcome Toby, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for us to have you here, and please, I leave you the stage. Thank you.
Do I have a microphone?
The microphone is there. Thank you.
Buongiorno tutti. I must apologize that I'm speaking English. Hopefully, if I'm invited back another year, I will have perfected my Italian and I'll be able to speak in Italian next year. I'm also conscious that I think I'm all that stands between you and lunch, which makes this a particularly tough gig. In English, last before lunch, it's going to be difficult. But I just wanted to start by saying I'm very honored to be here, not just because I'm in a room of teachers and students who are the undervalued lifeblood of our schools around the world, but also to be here in Turin and with Riconnessioni, which is a genuinely globally exciting project, and it's of huge interest to both me personally and Nesta, which is an innovation foundation based in the UK, but we also have a sister foundation called Nesta Italia, based in Turin here. And I'll have some contact details on my final slide. Do reach out if you have any questions about the work that we do. So very quickly, and I'm hoping that this will move to the next slide. I might need some assistance here. So very quickly, I'll explore just what an innovation foundation is. What is it that we do, and how do we do it? So our ambition is to back new ideas to tackle the big challenges of our time. And in practice, that looks like a combination of research, finding out about the best practice around the world, innovative policies, new technological developments. Research then combined with experimentation and finance. Testing out new ideas, running small pilots, incubating new businesses internally, and also operating like a grant funder or a for-profit investor in ideas that have the potential to improve society for the better. So that's our big mission. And one of the main areas that we work in is education. So I will, again, there's a little delay here. Perhaps I need to point that way. Okay, mastered it. So there are three big challenges that are at the back of our minds when we're thinking in the UK about our education work. And I want to go into them very quickly, and then I will go into more detail into some research that we're carrying out with Fondazione per la Scuola. But I think it's useful background for the work that we're trying to do. So the first challenge is, how do we build a broader education system? I think we see in our schools around the world an emphasis on the things that we can measure. How well people do in exams, whether they stay in school and attend every day of the term, which are all important. But we know, and we've heard today, that education is much broader than those types of examinable subjects. And we see that this gap between what schools are able to provide and the breadth of things that we would like schools to provide growing larger in the UK, but also around the world. For example, you can see on my slide there are some sensational headlines about robots taking away everyone's jobs, and what will the future look like? Well, we carried out some research to think a little bit about the type of future that the students in this room will be going into. What type of careers will they be following? What type of opportunities will they have? to try and understand a little bit more about how broad our school system needs to be. And I won't go into too much detail, but you can find this on our website. This is a useful tool that teachers and students may find to understand both the prospects for certain types of jobs. So if you want to be a teacher in the future, how likely is it that being a teacher will be replaced by a robot? Well, it turns out it's very unlikely indeed. We're not getting rid of teachers anytime soon. But you can also identify the types of wider skills and competencies, like collaboration, like problem solving, that are associated with the jobs that are going to be more popular in the future, for which demand is going to rise. And I won't go into too much more detail other than to flag we have a tool for teachers which explores this research, and you can download that from our website. It's free. It is in English, but it's a combination of videos and other resources. So please do, I would encourage you to have a look at that and use it. It's a useful tool to explain to young people what the future of work might look like. The second tool I just want to flag very quickly is a skills map. So as a student, how do you understand the types of skills that might be important in the future in terms of the breadth of the education that you should be seeking out? Here on the screen is a snap from a skills map. So you can click on individual occupations and you can identify the types of skills that employers are looking for based on 42 million job adverts collected over the last 2 years and some more clever colleagues than I who carried out that analysis. The second challenge I just want to mention briefly is also about fairness. When we talk about innovation in our school systems, we sometimes forget that innovation often has losers as well as winners. And for us all thinking about school systems, education systems around the world, we must pay attention to ensure that when we innovate, we have in our minds those who are most in need. So one example I can point to is the focus on coding and computers in school, which is fantastic. We need this in the future. But let me give an example from the UK. When we changed the name of one of our exam qualifications from ICT, Information Communication Technology, to computer science, the number of girls who chose to study computer science dropped massively. So we must always bear in mind these unintended consequences when we think of big, ambitious innovation in schools. And the third challenge I want to think about is how we build a smarter education system. And here really I'm talking about technology. All around the world, an enormous amount of money is being spent on technology in our schools. Institutions which are in every country and have sometimes been a little bit resistant to change and technology. In 2017, nearly $9.56 billion was spent on education technology around the world. But I think we need a slightly higher standard for what we expect from smarter education systems. We need a greater focus on evidence, a greater focus on training teachers, and a greater focus of thinking on those unintended outcomes that come with ambitious system change. Struggling again slightly, there we go. So this is a question that we've been thinking about in partnership with Fondazione per la SCUOLA as we carry out a research project over, well, it's been about 6 months so far, and we'll be publishing our results in June of this year. How should we approach investment in technology, but with those 3 challenges in mind that I mentioned? And so I just briefly wanted to go into 5 key features of innovative and interesting programs around the world. So I should begin by saying we set out first to, there we go. So our first job was to identify exciting practice around the world. This has a global reach, this research focus. So after talking to experts in countries around the world, we identified 44 examples of particularly interesting practice. And what I want to emphasize here is that we're not talking about individual schools doing fantastic things, which is very important, but we're really thinking about the more ambitious programs that are seeking to reach tens, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of schools. And we narrowed that down to 9 examples, which we're looking at in more detail to try and understand what are the enabling conditions for really cutting-edge investment in technology around the world. So here I will go into, very briefly, 5 key features. I've gone too far. So the first feature really is perhaps the most obvious, but it's a very strong vision for the program as a whole. And very often that vision has nothing to do with technology at all. On the screen we can see one example from the Manaya Kalani Education Trust. It's a bit of a mouthful. Manaya Kalani Education Trust in New Zealand. They're a network of 15 schools that set out to answer a question, which was, how do we help Maori children who are more disadvantaged than their peers do better in school? No technology in their question that they set out to answer. But the most effective approach that is tested and evaluated has been to use digital devices to increase the attendance in school of children, the motivation to learn, and the relationships between students and their parents as they're able to use the devices at home. So there, the real key has been technology supporting a larger vision for the program. So as we look around the world, that's one of the real key features of interesting, innovative, and impactful projects. The second feature I want to talk about when the slide comes up is to think a little bit about networks. Networks are how we spread ideas, best practice, enthusiasm, and I've noticed that the word community keeps recurring today when we talk about Riconnessioni. And today, an event like this, the festival, is an example of how networks can support good learning. But we see increasingly innovative ways of supporting networks. The example on your screen takes place in Wales, nearer to home for me. In Wales, they wanted to launch a new curriculum which dealt with digital competencies. But their starting point was that teachers around Wales had very varying degrees of experience and confidence with thinking about new technologies in their classroom. So how could they support the scale of a program over all the schools in Wales? Well, they set up very purposeful networks to support that learning. And we see that happening in many of the different examples that we have encountered. So thinking very interestingly about how, as teachers or learners, we can join networks, support networks with clear priorities for what they're trying to achieve is an interesting feature of successful programs. The third area I want to touch on is also quite interesting. It's the role of non-government actors. If we think about the history of schooling around the world, since the kind of 18th century, it's really been led by strong, centralized leadership. More recently, that's been government. But technology presents quite an interesting opportunity for many different types of organizations to get involved in schools. So it might be the company that is trying to sell a school a piece of technology that you might find annoying, but equally it might be Open Fiber, or it might be Fondazioni per la SCUOLA, which are given an opportunity to invest in a single technology which has really far-reaching impact over our school system. But it isn't just money that these organizations are bringing. They're bringing new methods, resources, skills, and ways of working. And I'll point to the example on the screen here, which is the Bridge International chain of academies. It's an enormous chain of schools across 6 countries in Africa and various other countries around the world. And at its heart is a tablet for teachers, which has their daily lesson plan downloaded onto it through a hotspot each morning. And it enables them to have consistent and constantly updated resources to use in their class. Well, one of the methods that Bridge International Academies brought to the school systems that they work in is to run rapid A/B testing to test on a daily basis whether one form of lesson plan is slightly more effective than another form of lesson plan. I know the English system better than I know the Italian system, but I can assure you that in the UK, that type of method for constant evaluation is unheard of. It would be impossible to achieve. So we can be wise when we're thinking about the cutting-edge practice around the world to really think about the added benefit of some of these non-government actors to innovation around the world. And the fourth feature I want to touch on is scale. I mentioned at the beginning that we're really interested in those ambitious programs that have managed to spread beyond individual schools, and there will be some in this room, we can all think of inspirational head teachers who can do fantastic things with their pupils, but how do we spread that across schools? So one of the very interesting features that we have identified is how scale can be both a problem. How do you spread things consistently between schools? But scale can also be a useful challenge to understand what is really sustainable. So the example that we have on screen is a project taking place in Brazil, where the Lehman Foundation have funded the translation of the entire Khan Academy platform into Portuguese, and then supported its rollout into several thousand schools in Brazil initially, and there's now over 1.2 million learners registered in Brazil to use the Khan Academy resources. Well, one of their driving forces was to test this in the most difficult situation first. So rather than test whether the program could work in Rio, where there is more funding for schools, connectivity is faster and more reliable, they tested it in regions around Manaus, which is closer to the rainforest, much more difficult, has highly unreliable internet access. So these are interesting features that can be played out within our schools as well. So sometimes, instead of testing a new idea with our highest ability sets or our most well-funded schools, we can think about how we can test them in really difficult situations too. And then the final thing that I wanted to discuss very quickly, if the slide will play, is the role of teachers. Teachers are genuinely at the heart of absolutely every program that we've come across that has been impactful, successful, and technology-driven. Teachers are completely at the heart of that. And importantly, it's about facilitating space for teachers to innovate, about facilitating them to grow their confidence, give them training and support required to use technology, because using technology in the classroom is one of the most high-risk environments that you could imagine, with 20, 30 kids who are ready for things to go wrong. So our teachers have to be applauded for being brave to do this in the first place. But secondly, it's about the information that we provide to teachers too. And so that's really where I wanted to end, by just underlining that it's fantastic to be here, because what is taking place in Turin is a hugely exciting example of how teachers can be involved in this program of very ambitious innovation. It's wonderful to see and to have learned more about. And we will be publishing that research, which I mentioned, in June. And I hope that we can share it all widely with you and that it will be useful to you. So finally, thank you very much. And I'm hoping some contact details will appear here, but do reach out if you have any questions.